Thanks for being with us on this Wednesday morning. Happy to welcome our first guest. You know him well. He is a regular here on SuperTalk Mississippi. Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Douglas, good morning to you.
Good morning, Richard. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. I appreciate it very much. We have heard a lot about Mississippi's momentum, the Mississippi miracle. Sometimes that refers to education. Sometimes it refers to economic development. So your entity, the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, decided to do a deep dive, a deep analysis on this economic development hot streak that Mississippi has been on. Let's kind of take this in bites, maybe not do it all at once, but let's start with an overarching theme that you found.
Mississippi's on the rise. Mississippi is doing extremely well economically. Here's a statistic you may find surprising. There has been more economic growth in Mississippi in the past 5 years than over the previous 15 years combined. If you look at a graph of it, and we've got our lovely graph in our new report, it looks whoosh. It's a sudden uplift in output and growth. In fact,
did you say it looks whoosh? Like whoosh?
Yeah.
Just taking off?
It's taking off. It's like one of Elon's rockets. It's going up there. And the interesting thing is, if you believe federal bureaucrats, the Federal Bureau of Economic Analysis released some data at the end of last year showing that actually Mississippi is one of the fastest growing states in America. You might not believe it because it's from the feds, but actually the data they present shows Mississippi is one of the fastest growing states, not just in GDP growth, but in personal income growth. This is a historic moment. We really could be turning a corner.
You may have seen that graphic. I know you have. I'm saying listeners, you may have seen that as well, where Mississippi is number 2 in the entire country in year-over-year GDP growth. We're talking gross domestic product, the things that are produced in Mississippi and sent elsewhere or are consumed here in the state. That feels like a staggering number. And I don't even know if we fully understand exactly what that means. Can you try to explain what the GDP growth being number 2 nationally means?
You've got to be a little bit careful of the data, particularly in an economy like Mississippi, which is so dependent on the farming sector, because anyone who knows anything about these statistics knows that rural agrarian economies, agriculture is a notoriously cyclical business, and you can look like you're number 1 year and you don't look like that the next year. So with that caveat, and this is a snapshot, it is nonetheless absolutely staggering. It shows that with the sole exception of Arkansas, there is no state in America that was growing faster at the end of last year than Mississippi. This is a truly remarkable if it becomes a trend rather than a snapshot, this is really quite something of real significance, historic significance.
Well, you say the other state is Arkansas, and there are similarities there in strong Republican leadership, majorities in the House and in the Senate. Sarah Huckabee Sanders leading the state of Arkansas, obviously Tate Reeves here in Mississippi.
Well, if you start to ask the question of why there's this growth, you're really onto something there. Both Arkansas and Mississippi have engaged in tax reform and tax cuts. Mississippi started doing this since 2022. We know that in the most recent session, they passed legislation that will eventually phase out the income tax. Look, if you're an inward investor and you know that Mississippi is going to be eliminating the income tax, that is a massive reason to come and build your business here. So tax reform is one of the reasons. Another is labor market flexibility.
Let me interrupt there just for a second, because there were so many headlines in this particular legislative session about the beginning of the full phase out of the income tax in Mississippi. But I think you're pointing to the tax reduction that began a few years ago. We're really not at a point yet where we are seeing the benefits of what's going to happen over the course of the next decade plus in getting all the way to zero in state income tax. This is more a reflection of what has happened over the last few years. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think that is accurate. I mean, the Philip Gunn, full credit to him. Philip Gunn, when he was Speaker, pushed for a bill in 2022 that began to reduce the income tax to a flat 4%. And I think because businesses that are looking to make multi-million-dollar investments look ahead, they look to the future. If they know that the income tax is going to be reduced to 4%, if they know that it's now going to be phased out to zero, that is a reason for them, even though the tax cut might not have taken full effect yet, that is nonetheless a reason for them to come, and we're already seeing that.
You know, in talking with people about the elimination of the state income tax as it pertains to economic development, there have been kind of some mixed answers. There are people that go, well, that's not necessarily what is driving the growth. When companies say, hey, we're coming to Mississippi, it's an overall friendly business climate that is so attractive to those entities. But then they say, but in terms of attracting employees from out of state for some of these companies that are coming in, that is another piece of the puzzle.
I'm sure that's right. I'm sure it's not one factor. I'm sure there's a multiplicity of factors. And I think a second really important reason is a good labor market. The labor market in Mississippi, we're an at-will employment state. It's a flexible labor market. One law that was passed in 2021 that never really got the attention that I think it deserves was a bill on so-called occupational licensing reform. This is something Mississippi Center for Public Policy helped to spearhead. It basically means that it's easier for people to get permits to work if you work in an occupation that requires a permit. And the effect of that is we're beginning to see that. It's one of those rather boring laws that was passed, but it's having real positive consequences today. So I think tax cuts, labor market reform, low-cost energy. I know there's a lot of debate at the moment about energy and all the rest of it, but the reality is in this state you've got low-cost electricity. It's 14 cents per kilowatt hour. That is a technical speak for saying it's very cheap, and that is a massive
it's interesting
factor.
to me. It's interesting that you brought that up right there, because that's exactly the next question I was going to ask him. We had Chris Brown yesterday, the Northern District Public Service Commissioner, and I don't know that most Mississippians, when they are thinking about economic development, their thought immediately goes to power generation. But the more we have dived into these economic development projects, the more we've heard from leaders all across the state that's one of the driving factors, that you've got to have availability of power, but you've also got to have cheap power. And it feels that Mississippi is taking some steps to make sure that both of those things not only are in place but are sustainable moving forward.
Absolutely. We've got some of the lowest cost electricity in the country, and there's going to be a 30 or 40% increase in the amount of electricity we need to generate over the next decade or so.
In Mississippi, not nationally.
In Mississippi. If you think about it this way, people focus on the data centers. They consume vast quantities of electricity. But imagine that you ran Nissan in Madison. You make something like 400,000 cars, a huge number of cars. You need low-cost electricity there. Imagine you run a poultry business. You need cheap electricity. So it benefits.
Or an
all
aluminum
businesses.
mill like we've got in the Golden Triangle that is so heavily dependent on that readily available and reliable power.
It's one of those things. Having low-cost energy is one of the key ingredients to economic growth, and we've got it. We've got low-cost energy in Mississippi. It's another reason why we're doing so well. I think there's a fourth reason, and it's, again, something we tend to overlook. I know that when people think about SEC colleges, they think about important things like football, but the fact is we've got these wonderful colleges, universities, that have created sort of hubs of innovation around them. If you go to Starkville or Oxford, you see this growth, and it's because the universities are bringing in smart people, and smart people are clustering around those universities, and they're creating these sort of economic hubs. And I think the success story of Mississippi can't be told without reference to some of those public universities and the success they're bringing.
We'll talk more about that on the other side of the break. Also going to play a clip from you from CNBC yesterday. This is more of a national take. Ken Langone, who was the co-founder of Home Depot, was on Squawk Box yesterday and has kind of come around on the president of the United States because of some of his economic policies. We'll talk about that on the other side of the break as well. Mornings with Richard Cross, Super Talk Mississippi. We're back with you right after this. More with Douglas Carswell. Back with you, Mornings with Richard Cross, Super Talk Mississippi. Thanks for making us part of the start of your day. Douglas Carswell is my guest, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. I want to go back to where we were right before the break, Douglas. You were talking about the impact of universities in Mississippi, whether you're talking about Ole Miss and Oxford, Mississippi State and Starkville, Southern Miss and Hattiesburg. The community college system is playing a huge role. in the development of tradesmen and creating a labor force that is skilled in the areas that need it. And you were saying that plays a pretty vital role in terms of attracting a labor force that's not already here, but also attracting businesses who are thinking about future labor force.
Absolutely. We're starting to see, lots of people from across America wanting to come and study in Mississippi. Young people, the number of young people going to college across America is beginning to fall because of demographics, but it's not in Mississippi because our colleges and universities here are popular, and Ole Miss and Starkville are growing. But I think there are things we need to do. We've got about 80,000 students in Mississippi in 8 different institutions. I think there are some reforms we could implement. We could move to a performance funding model so that we fund universities that have utility rather than paying for perhaps what some progressive professors want to spend money on. We could look at funding according to graduation completion rates, funding courses where people actually complete their degree studies. And I think we should fund on the basis of postgraduate employment rates. These are, I think, common sense suggestions to make sure that our colleges and universities are actually producing people with the skills we need rather than, as I said, what some liberal professors might want.
So common sense in your mind, but is that practical? I mean, are those ideas that are practical, applicable in the university setting?
Oh, they're very applicable. We published our paper showing how to do it. Yeah, I mean, other states, Florida has done this. Other states are looking to do this. Another thing I think we need to do is to end university tenure. I think one of the reasons why sometimes public money at universities has been used on degrees that don't really add value is perhaps because we've got colleges that are run in the interests of those with tenure. So I think we need to reform the tenure rules. Florida, again, has led the way on this. So I think there are practical suggestions in this paper to reform the university sector in Mississippi.
What about the elementary, junior high, high school education system? Mm-hmm. How does that tie into this economic growth conversation?
Your listeners will be very aware of some of the improvements that have happened in outcomes, reading rates, and particularly 4th grade reading and 4th grade math. And I don't want to take away from that. Those are solid achievements. But the fact is that absentee rates are still chronically high. We're not as good as we could be. And obviously, if young people going through the education system in Mississippi aren't coming out with good math and reading and writing skills, they're not going to be as good in the workforce as they can and should be. So I think we need some kind of school choice model. We're surrounded by states that now have that. And in the paper, we put forward 2 alternatives. We could go the Arkansas-Tennessee route, which means that parents would be able to spend about $7,000 allocated to a school of their choice for their child. Or we could go the Oklahoma model, which is a tax credit model. I don't really mind which we do, but we've got to reform the education system with more parent power. All the states around us are doing it.
You've been very much out front about you support universal school choice, not even a hybrid of that, right?
It's got to be universal because every child in Mississippi needs to have the same opportunities, and you're not going to get that if you have selective school choice.
I'm interested how these two things tie together. So we're talking about the progress that the state of Mississippi has had. It is a southeast thing also, right? We have seen a number of states. You mentioned Tennessee and Arkansas, obviously Texas, Florida. Some of those states are different in that they have different metropolitan areas, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies that call home. And so Mississippi in some ways is playing catch up. But is this something that is tied to what is happening nationally? I was having a conversation with a guy last night, bright guy, and he said, we've gotten to a point where it's cool to be conservative again. And I thought that was an interesting take because for the longest time it was, how liberal could you be because that determined how cool you could be. I'm wondering if the business community is finally taking note. This is Ken Langone. He is a co-founder of Home Depot. He was responsible for the financing. That was his biggest success. He was on Squawk Box on CNBC yesterday and was talking about how he has completely come around on Donald Trump. Take a listen.
Look, let me tell you right now, I am sold on Trump. In fact, I'll say this. I think he's got a good shot at going down in history as one of our best presidents ever.
That is a real turnaround because you didn't want to vote for him.
I tell you the reason. I want to tell you, I'm a believer. What I'm seeing happening is absolutely nothing short of a great thing. And there's a beat. People are walking with more bounce in there. It's all around.
I gave you quite a bit of grief.
Huh?
I gave you grief.
You give me grief?
I gave you grief when it was a binary choice. You're still complaining about Trump and it was a binary choice. It's like, are you kidding me?
Knowledge implies one thing. When you made a mistake, admit it.
Okay.
I think this guy is turning out to be a president.
Right.
One of the pilots on that miraculous trip to Iran that we wiped out, whatever the hell we wiped out,
Right.
he said, you're the only guy that in the presidency that would have done what you did.
All right, so that's Ken Langone. This is a guy that's a billionaire a bunch of times over. He's been involved in business. Here's my question. Is national economic policy tied directly to Mississippi economic policy, or are those two things independent?
I think what's happening nationally is definitely helping Mississippi, but Mississippi, as you said earlier, is kind of playing catch up. We're joining the Southern success story, where the South has been growing phenomenally fast for 30, 40 years, with the exception of one or two states, including Mississippi. Mississippi is starting to become part of that Southern success story. We're starting to see the growth here that we've had in Alabama before and Tennessee before. And we're starting to get that growth because we're starting to do what some of those states are doing. Income tax elimination, labor market reform. We're joining that Southern success story because we're willing to make bold changes, just like Sarah Huckabee Sanders did in Arkansas. Instead of politics as usual, instead of business as usual, instead of the good old boys in the Capitol carrying on and voting for law that favors various vested interests, we're starting to see the change Mississippi needs. And it's having real positive consequences. We're starting to turn things around.
Douglas, I think about the need for continuity, and this may sound like I'm on a wild goose chase to get here. Thinking about, okay, Donald Trump in office right now, but when you go Republican, Democrat, it's like policies go into place and then they get stripped back. The importance of Donald Trump finishes his term and then J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or whomever follows with another Republican president. Here's where I'm tying this to Mississippi. I would argue that Mississippi is where it is today because of the continuity in the governor's mansion and with Republican leadership. So it starts with Haley Barbour in terms of building up a rainy day fund and putting some money in the bank for Mississippi. And then Phil Bryant gets those first big economic projects going with Yokohama and some others. And then Tate Reeves has taken that over the last 5 years and just put the hammer down. Does that make sense? Is there an importance there to stick with a party, term over term, as opposed to just, let's elect this guy and see what he can do in the next 4 years?
Well, we don't advocate for parties. We advocate for policies. And I think continuity of policy, each of those people is building on the achievements of their predecessor. When we saw the tax cuts passed in the legislature this session, it was building on what Philip Gunn had achieved. When we see the Speaker advocating for parent power and school choice in 2026, he will be building on the achievements of Tate Reeves as Lieutenant Governor and those who passed legislation to begin the improvements in Mississippi education policy. It's one leader building on the achievements of others, but we mustn't be comfortable with thinking that, okay, incrementalism, let's do this slowly. We need to have a sense of urgency about this, because if we don't change things for the better quickly, other states will get the growth, and we're in a competition with our neighbors.
The name of the report is The Mississippi Miracle, Bold Reforms for Growth. You can find it on the Mississippi Center for Public Policy website. Read it for yourself. I guess I'd like to finish here. I know I asked you, give me an overarching theme from the report. What's the biggest takeaway for you at the completion of this study? What's the thing that stands out the most for you in this examination of the economic growth in Mississippi?
We need to be bold. If Mississippi is bold and has pro-growth policies, we really can change from being 50th out of 50 to being one of the fastest growing states. We're on the cusp of that change.
It's an interesting report. I would encourage you to read it yourself. Douglas Carswell, thank you so much for your time. A pleasure to visit, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you.
We will wrap up the 7 o'clock hour of Mornings with Richard Cross on the other side of this break. Glad to have you along for the ride. MRC broadcasting from SEC Football Media Days in Atlanta, Georgia. We're talking all things Mississippi with you this morning. We'll take a timeout. We are back right after this.